The vast hall buzzed with the tense energy of a final interstellar judgment day. At its heart stood Captain Elias Kite, his shoulders taut under the accusing stares of the Tribunal of United Systems. This was no mere human court. Kite was not on trial by his own kind, but by the galaxy itself. Representatives from hundreds of star systems sat in tiered seating, a kaleidoscope of species united only by their revulsion at the charges against him. Kite faced accusations so monstrous they defied comprehension: genocide, the use of prescribed weapons, and the deliberate targeting of civilians. His indictment painted him as a dark stain on humanity's brief journey among the stars. Captain Kite, the lead adjudicator's voice slithered through the universal translators, its tone a cold reminder of the alien tribunal he faced. The speaker was a Zill representative, a spindly insectoid creature that Kite would rather have crushed underfoot than heard speak. The charges of war crimes stand against you. For the record, do you admit or deny their veracity? A collective gasp rippled through the assembly as the formal question offered Kite a chance to show a shred of remorse. Instead, his response tore through the chamber like a shockwave. I admit them. My actions brought ruin to the Exil Empire, to their worlds, to their billions, and given the chance, I'd gladly do it again. The tribunal erupted into chaos. Kite had effectively proclaimed himself an unrepentant war criminal, and the assembly's outrage only fed his grim resolve. They would hear him out, every bitter word, even if it turned the entire galaxy against humanity. For 2 standard years. Kite began, his voice amplified and cutting through the uproar. The Exil war machine butchered its way across human sectors. Their initial demands were simple: technology sharing, resource tribute. The usual shakedown for a star-faring fledgling, like some cosmic mafia. Only we had something they wanted more than tribute: our resilience. A holographic map rose from a pedestal near the tribunal, pulsing red with Exil victories. Early reports had depicted humanity's resistance as valiant chaos, but to a veteran like Kite, it was an organized slaughter. Human ships and colonies fell like swatted flies under the Exil's overwhelming technological superiority. Yet, instead of collapsing, humanity held. Shattered fleets regrouped. Ambushes were launched from the dust of lost colonies, and suicidal defense stands bought time to evacuate civilians. In the face of certain defeat, something in the human spirit ignited. The Exil never understood. Kite continued. They expected fear, the smart surrender. We could have been subjugated, milked for technology, lived as second-class citizens, but their arrogance wouldn't allow that. This is the mistake I exploited. Kite's words caught in his throat as an image from those years seared across his memory, not a battle, but its brutal aftermath: the shattered husks of evacuation ships, their civilian dead drifting with the cold indifference of space. His voice grew colder as he resumed. They didn't give us fear. They gave us clarity. Our destruction wasn't about conquest, it was about our potential, some imagined threat we might pose if allowed to grow into their equal. The tribunal tried to dismiss Kite's words as self-justifying propaganda, but doubt began to fester. A representative from the Ursinoid League, a bear-like being, pressed with unsettling calm. Are you suggesting the Sil were afraid of humanity, Captain? That seems far-fetched. Kite nearly laughed, a bitter sound catching in his throat. We're an evolutionary fluke on a backwater world, barely 2 centuries into spaceflight. The Exil have empires older than our recorded history. No, fear is the wrong word. He met their collective gaze, the tribunal's righteous judgment fading as if washed away. It was dread. The same chill you'd feel watching a nest of wasps hatch, when you know their sting is deadly. Kite stepped further from the defendant's stand, addressing the crowd directly. The Exil saw in us their future. It's what any dominant species sees in a rising one: a rival, a challenge. For years we were an amusement, a curiosity to experiment on. And then we were inconvenient. A holographic map of the war pulsed with new red dots, representing Sil victories, yet now tiny specks of blue human triumphs began appearing. You call my actions crimes. What did you expect us to do? Surrender when they showed no mercy? Fight on fair terms when they rigged the game from the start? He gestured around the chamber. Would your morality accept being snuffed out because a stronger species couldn't tolerate the idea of sharing the stars someday? His question struck like hammer blows, blurring the moral lines. This was no longer a simple condemnation of a rogue officer, it was a species standing trial for defying its preordained extinction. For many in the assembly, Kite's words weren't about human survival alone. Every system, no matter how powerful, looked up the evolutionary chain and saw reflections of their own species in humanity's tenacious flame. The Exil representative's voice, tinged with predatory nervousness, Cut through the tension, you justify genocide because of potential danger? Your victory. What cost? How many souls are on your ledger? Kite didn't miss the shift in the room's atmosphere. That single question had the potential to unify even those who sympathized with humanity, as the horrors he confessed might prove too great to condone. More than your minds can process, Kite admitted, his voice heavy with the weight of innumerable deaths. He didn't spare the tribunal the grim litany of atrocities humanity committed to rival the Sil, but he offered just enough truth to turn their moral outrage inside out. A new image emerged from the holographic map, not a battle, but a world-designated colony P215, once lush with grasslands and shimmering oceans, now reduced to a charred monument to human desperation. We couldn't match them ship to ship, couldn't hold our borders. So we changed the rules of the game, Kite spat, tracing ghostly fingers over the continents of P215. The Exil had a US trapped there, herding what remained of our fleet into orbit. That should have been it, a glorious annihilation in the grand style they love. Then we transmitted surrender and ignited P215's core. Shouts of shock echoed through the chamber. The weaponization of a planetary core was the ultimate taboo, a line even hardened warrior races shuddered to cross. The tribunal now looked upon a humanity twisted into something unimaginable. It was their mistake to bring us into orbit, Kite whispered, the horror still fresh years later. 1 billion human lives sacrificed. I made this gamble that with our fleet intact, even the loss of a whole world might leave enough fire in us to turn this war. The image of P215 lingered as a haunting testament to humanity's willingness to break every boundary for survival. The war we won was not the war we began, Kite confessed. Our souls, twisted from what was needed to survive. They were right to fear us, it turns out. The human war machine doesn't just break bodies, it breaks who we are. Kite's words drained the tribunal of its righteous indignation, leaving only a coldness in its place. The Exil were no longer mere victims but architects of their own monstrous doom. One by one, questions followed, not about war crimes but about tactics, strategic inflection points, and how humanity transformed from prey to predator in such a short span. As the delegates dissected the conflict, an unspoken realization dawned: humanity wasn't unique. Many among them had histories of survival by any means necessary, their empires built atop the ruins of extinguished cultures. The Sithar Collective's reptilian diplomat finally broke the silence, his tone less disgusted and more fascinated. There were turning points. Could the path you chose have been avoided, had you played differently? Kite hesitated, the first sign of uncertainty cracking his resolute demeanor. Had this all been unavoidable? Were the monstrous things humanity became inevitable echoes of the war's initial cruelties? The question haunted him nightly. Our first attempt wasn't war, he admitted, his voice thick with grief. It was diplomacy. Our delegates reached out with peace accords, offered tech exchanges, whatever the Exil wanted within reason. He fixed the tribunal with a hard stare. Their first response was to cripple our ambassadors, mutilate them, trophies left at the edge of our space, and that was before the invasion fleets even mobilized. Kite's declaration painted humanity's early cries for truce and negotiation in a chilling new light. In war. Kite declared, there are victims, and there are those who bring the storm to our doorsteps. The Exil lit the first flame, not us. All we did was refuse to go quietly into the ash heap of history. His defiance wasn't a defense of war crimes but of a species cornered, exposing the uneasy hypocrisy in the hearts of all those eager to condemn without the taste of real desperation. And there was more. The tribunal wasn't a monolithic block, it boiled with individual grudges, border disputes, and simmering hatreds. In this trial, many saw themselves and found themselves wanting. They could convict Kite, making an example of humanity before their galactic peers. But with every harsh ruling, they'd issue a grim directive: if threatened with annihilation, you must accept it. This, more than Kite's brutal campaign, might leave scars deeper than any war. As he stood back at the defendant's stand, no condemnation came, only an uncomfortable deliberation that stretched far longer than he anticipated. Days bled into weeks as whispers replaced open debate in the chamber. Kite wondered if they would break with protocol, cast no official judgment, and leave him hanging in limbo with humanity's fate undecided. The delay wore down his defenses. Each night, a private hell opened inside his quarters, filled with ghosts. Children from P215 floated amidst the charred debris, their eyes bright and accusing. Commanders wept beside the ruins of once vibrant worlds. These visions haunted him not because they blamed him, but because they understood his choices far better than the aliens of the tribunal ever could. Still, a sliver of hope kept him steady. His defense counsel, a brilliant legal mind from the pacifist-leaning Aurelian conclave, was an unlikely champion for a supposed monster. But in her, Kite saw an ally who grasped the trial's subtext. This wasn't about law, but about the raw essence of what it meant to be sentient in a cosmos filled with danger. When the tribunal finally reconvened, the initial unity of shock was gone. Some delegates looked at Kite with pity, others with calculation, and most with a chillingly neutral disinterest. The Sithar collective abstained from judgment entirely, with their ambassador's words sending shivers through the room. War has no clear morality, only those who win it and those who write its history. Choose your battles accordingly. Smaller systems that feared larger neighbors sided cautiously with Kite, recognizing him as a chilling warning about empires born of blood rather than trade. The Ursinoid League mirrored this position, declaring survival has fangs, no matter what shape we bear. Most shockingly, a former exil colony world, long under their harsh rule, offered a statement that nearly reignited the tribunal. They claimed that Kite's war had saved them not from Sil justice, but from eventual genocide. Their own liberation struggle, born in the chaos of the human-Sil conflict, now mirrored Kite's grim logic. To survive, sometimes you must become more monstrous than the monster. A minority, still appalled by humanity's ruthlessness, insisted on punishment. To let these crimes stand would make a mockery of interstellar cooperation. They demanded Kite's imprisonment, and some even called for humanity's disarmament, but their outrage was laced with the fear of creating a martyr. If condemned, Kite wouldn't simply be a criminal, but the embodiment of their own lurking terror. The exil representative, who had remained largely silent, shocked the tribunal with their simple stance. The exil accepted defeat. Captain Kite is correct, came the hiss of the translator. Humanity could not have been absorbed. Their aggression matched our own, and while your victory cost us greatly, you proved an empire born of such will cannot be safely ruled over. Further retaliation shall be considered an act of galactic war on any who stand with Earth. This was not absolution nor forgiveness, but a thinly veiled threat. Humanity was now judged too volatile to fully eliminate. Kite nearly laughed at the absurdity. The galaxy had made them into villains they never wished to be, and then declared it safer to keep such danger at arm's length. In the end, the tribunal reached no formal verdict. Their legal apparatus crumbled what law could truly encompass. The horror Kite laid bare. The trial ended not with a bang, but a whimper. Kite remained under house arrest within Earth space for months, a caged symbol. The uncertainty of his fate was worse than any formal sentence. They could brand him a criminal or a savior. This stalemate fueled a different kind of fear. Earth watched the interstellar news on an uneasy knife edge, uncertain whether humanity would remain ostracized, quarantined, or covertly watched as a disease waiting to erupt. The unknown felt worse than a harsh condemnation. They could plan for war, but not for the galaxy's chilling neutrality. Humanity was no closer to being accepted, and perhaps even further from their original fear that to the stars, they might well be the ultimate horror story. Yet even in this, Kite saw a victory of sorts, albeit one drenched in cold sweat and nightmares. Then, in the odd ways of politics, it was the aliens themselves who broke the impasse. Not in friendship, but in grudging respect. An invitation arrived, not to an interstellar alliance or the halls of the tribunal, but to a summit of galactic powers to retool outdated military pacts. It came without names, from shadowy quarters that thrived on backroom whispers and trade deals. They want your input, his Aurelian legal counsel told him, her eyes bright with fascination. Your strategy, or maybe a piece of the madness that produced it. She didn't judge him, merely observed the chilling fact that they now found his dark brand of warfare valuable. Earth's reply was simple. Captain Elias Kite would attend. In a small conference room at the edge of disputed neutral space, Kite finally walked free. It was not a hero's homecoming. Earth still debated what he was, their leaders cautiously optimistic, while the common masses eyed him with equal parts dread and grudging pride. They would never love him, not truly, but acceptance wasn't on the menu anyway. Only respect, or at least enough fear of what humanity might become if cornered again. His life wasn't back to normal, nor would it ever be. His hands still shook on sleepless nights, and a deep exhaustion haunted his gaze. But now, instead of a courtroom, he walked into the war rooms of empires as an invited guest, not a criminal. They dissected his methods, listened to his warnings, and most crucially, made space for human voices as they forged new codes of conflict on the galactic stage. Kite didn't crave this life. Glory was just the other side of shame, but duty still pressed its cold fingers into his back. He wasn't a diplomat, and the language of interstellar trade-offs and concessions often eluded him. His expertise lay in a single, bitter language, that of raw survival at any cost. Unfortunately, that was a language everyone seemed to understand with unnerving clarity. Yet, Kaiti found that his role held strange contradictions. Within those hallowed halls where star systems hammered out their uneasy coexistence, a single human presence carried more weight than entire delegations. When Kaiti walked into a negotiation, unspoken questions crackled in the air. How far would your kind truly go? What boundaries would Earth break if survival were on the line? Where did their fragile ethics end and the brutality begin? The answer lay in his silence more than any impassioned declaration. They wouldn't love humanity or even fully trust it. Yet it was a specific kind of distrust built upon acknowledging a threat both potent and leashed for now. In that tense stalemate, Kaiti saw another victory for his tired and scarred people. Earth was no longer a naive upstart to be exploited, but a predator held back only by its own thin leash of conscience. As Kaiti aged, the role shifted. He watched humanity flex its newfound influence, their military minds shaping galactic strategy, their scientists courted and warily watched all at once. In a few decades, a new generation took his place, less haunted, more polished, their brutality honed down to cold calculation. The humans in those rooms were chillingly adept, products of war colleges raised on case studies of the Exil conflict. The war he bled through shaped them, and he didn't entirely like what he saw in their eyes. You paved the way for this, an Aurelian colleague who became perhaps the closest thing to a friend he had in his twilight career, told him over drinks on a neutral world space station. Her kind was long-lived, still carrying the wide-eyed idealism he'd lost on the killing fields of his youth. But do you like where that path is leading? Honesty, fueled by too much of the station's recycled liquor, forced a sigh out of Kaiti. Do I think Earth is safer? Yes. And with every day they see us at these tables, a few more systems might get an inch of protection when some bigger bastard comes knocking. Do I like the people we're becoming? Hell no. Kaiti retired into anonymity, or as close to it as he could manage, while remaining an uncomfortable relic of his own wartime legend. Earth gave him a quiet backwater colony, far from the bustling shipping lanes and data relays. The official explanation was exhaustion, stress, and they weren't lying, just omitting the true cost. It wasn't the war itself that haunted him anymore. It was the slow, insidious change in everything he fought to protect. He watched Earth rise, not as a beacon of enlightenment, but as a grim imitation of what they had feared from the Exil. Alliances were now carved on his tactics, weapons systems evolved with terrifying echoes of those he unleashed for desperate survival. It mirrored the very logic he had laid out back in the tribunal, that survival could warp an idealist into a monster. His colony world was peaceful, painfully so. He tried farming, mostly failed at it, the soil never quite right compared to the scent of old Earth dust. Children of settlers stared at him in a mix of fear and awe, whispering the tale of Captain Kite, Galaxy's savior, Galaxy's villain, whatever version suited their parents' evening talks. There wasn't hate, nor admiration, just an alien distance. He was history, a walking nightmare the adults hoped their world would never taste. Nights were worst. His dreams didn't rehash battles but meetings. Endless boardrooms of interstellar negotiators, all echoing his younger self with only slight variations on chilling themes. How much are you willing to lose? To risk? What weapons of desperation sleep under your banner? It wasn't a question of right or wrong. They merely wanted to measure the depth of Earth's inherited savagery, the legacy Kite built not in war fleets or shattered worlds, but in broken ideals. We could have gone in a different direction. He sometimes spoke out loud, not realizing it until the emptiness echoed his words back. His old Aurelian friend would visit, sometimes with news of galactic events, but mostly in quiet companionship. She never judged, but he sometimes caught her watching him, measuring his descent into regret as the war hero faded, giving way to a bitter old man. In his final years, the dreams finally shifted. One night, the dead of P215 didn't stand in accusation. They simply joined him as they would in life, laughing and dancing, the children no longer ghosts but bright flesh and blood. The dream felt so achingly real that Kaiti nearly called out for the ship's medic, convinced his mind was finally unmoored. When he woke, a single thought hammered through the familiar dread they understand. The dead didn't haunt him, they were the only ones who truly understood the sacrifice, the warping that saved their kind. His final act hadn't been war, but an echoing curse on his species to become what they had abhorred, all in the name of never facing that same fate again. The weight of survival was crushing him now, an echo of the weight that had broken the Exil for and making themselves so terrible to face. Humanity had found their strength, but in doing so, something in them twisted. and with his dwindling energy, Kite wondered if there would be anyone left to twist it back when the time came. Kite's death was announced through official Earth Channel's natural causes, the old ticker simply wearing out. Some of those who remembered the old firebrand scoffed at the irony of such a mundane end for a living war epic. Others, raised on his dark legend, were simply relieved that his dangerous influence was extinguished. It fell to his Aurelian friend to write the eulogy. It never reached public ears, spoken solely by his graveside, just her, a local religious official, and some curious birds drawn by the fresh mound of alien soil. The words on his headstone remained simple: Captain Elias Kite Earth, survivor. Nothing more, no savior, no monster. Just the truth laid bare. Yet, in private, she did something defying her kind's burial customs, meant to free the spirit from lingering on its past burdens. Beneath the tombstone, she carefully laid a single datapad. Her eulogy wasn't for Kite, but for those who would come after. It detailed not his victories but his admissions. It included confessions to tactical war crimes buried in the tribunal transcripts, not as condemnation, but as a warning. In it, she recorded their conversations, those chilling glimpses of what humanity was becoming, not on battlefields but on the stage of interstellar power. It was a historical record, yes, but more importantly a whispered prayer that when dug up by his kind centuries later, some shred of empathy, some remnant of Kite's final doubts, might linger even if his name faded from glory. They left quickly, as her kind favored letting death lie. There was nothing here she would linger on. Kite's body wasn't the story anymore, but the echoes he set into motion across the star lanes. That story, both triumphant and chilling, still needed its ending. Perhaps his kind would choose a better one than the path they currently followed. Or perhaps another world would face its own moment of brutal extinction, digging up not his triumphs, but that buried record of his regrets. Elias Kite, whether hero or villain, may have saved Earth, but he ultimately lost the most important battle, the war for its soul. Yet, somewhere in that loss, in his fading eyes haunted by what they had wrought, maybe there lies a different spark of survival. Not in ruthlessness, but in remembering to always strive for something better, even if the cosmos keeps offering darkness as the easier path. Centuries passed, and Earth grew from a galactic curiosity into an uneasy powerhouse. Humanity's influence spread, their war doctrine forming the foundation upon which treaties were built, their cold pragmatism the language of tense spaceborne standoffs. Yet, there was always an edge of fear accompanying their expansion, not fear of conquest, but of something worse. Whispers persisted. Did they have hidden weapons left over from the Exil days? What lines would they cross now, their power unchecked? The Aurelian Collective, long Earth's quiet ally, felt this change most acutely. Their archives held Kite's eulogy, an uncomfortable legacy their long-lived historians passed down from generation to generation. Each reading rekindled the question: was Earth their friend, or merely a monster waiting for the stars to align in its favor once more? Then news came from the furthest edge of explored space. Scout probes were disappearing on the outskirts of an uncharted cluster. There was no distress call, just silence following routine sensor pings. An initial investigative force ventured forth. A mixed team pulled from a dozen allied systems and vanished likewise. This wasn't unheard of. Space held terrors, both natural and unknown. Yet, in the hushed meetings following the disappearance, a fear unlike any other bloomed. Had another Exil emerged, striking silently after centuries of presumed extinction? Or was it something new, attracted by the noise of galactic growth? Earth took charge of the next probe expedition, their expertise in such matters unparalleled. Deep beneath the surface, a grim decision took shape, not from military think tanks, but from the shadows of their intelligence bureaus. They sent the expeditionary fleet deep into the anomaly cluster armed with their greatest secret. It was the ultimate act of paranoia, a weapon born of both necessity and an echo of Kite's warning. They brought a salvaged worldcracker weapon from the archives. It was old, half-functional at best, and using it would make them pariahs across the galaxy if anything survived to cast judgment. The expedition into the stellar cluster was a journey into madness. Space warped and twisted unnaturally, sensor data turned to scrambled chaos, and the probe team's reports devolved into babbling incoherence. Then there was contact. The thing at the heart of the anomaly wasn't a rival empire at all. It was an intelligence, and not in the traditional sense. It was less a civilization and more a vast cosmic organism, drawn to the collective psychic roar of sentient civilizations as moths to a flame. This creature, for what else could it be called, fed not on planets but on minds. One by one, it burrowed into the unprepared expedition team, not violently, but in a seductive whisper, it offered unity, relief, connection beyond individual species or borders. At first, some even welcomed this contact, mistaking its intrusion for benevolence. But it fed on chaos and conflict, turning once allied races against each other in their maddened communion. This creature was entropy given form, the collapse of reason itself. All but one ship from the original probe fleet survived to broadcast its horrific warning before falling prey to this psychic horror. Only when faced with this insidious new threat did the true significance of Kite's legacy reveal itself. Earth made another grim decision. It wasn't the use of their cobbled-together world cracker, no. That was too blunt an instrument for this kind of enemy. Instead, they broadcast their knowledge into the heart of the creature. Not tactics, not warnings, but the full emotional depth of what made humanity such a danger. Earth had survived the Exil onslaught in part because they'd become willing to destroy an entire world without hesitation. That potential for unimaginable violence echoed like a gunshot in the cosmic predator's probing tendrils. They broadcast the agony of Elias Kite not as a figurehead but as a broken vessel, his regrets an echoing weapon against the creature's seductive whispers of oblivion. In this war, it wasn't technology or fleet strength that would save them, but raw emotional brutality. Earth offered themselves up as the worst example that interstellar conflict had wrought, and their open wound held enough potential horror to make the very cosmos recoil. It worked. Confronted not with war, but with the chilling capacity for annihilation bred out of desperation, the psychic devourer faltered, then shrank back. There were easier meals out there among the stars, softer minds to consume and turn against each other. The surviving systems knew they should despise Earth, condemn them. Once again, Earth had pushed the galaxy toward an ever more dangerous equilibrium. But within that fear, an uncomfortable awareness settled in their councils. The interstellar alliance that emerged in the creature's wake wouldn't forget what Earth did, or the kind of threat they would unleash if pushed again. And in that uneasy respect, in their grudging acknowledgement of the terrible shield humanity stood as, was a strange victory. Earth was not loved, but understood in a raw way no diplomatic effort could have achieved. Yet, the story didn't end there. Earth did change not overnight, not from some epiphany of enlightenment, but there was a shift, subtle and generational. Kite's eulogy, with its brutal honesty, was finally unearthed, his story no longer a secret shared among diplomats, but a required history lesson etched into their cultural curriculum. Children read not of his victories, but of the price paid. The Aurelian historian who buried the eulogy lived to see her bold act bear unexpected fruit. On backwater worlds near forgotten sectors, humanity didn't build monuments to conquest but shrines of a sort. Memorial gardens and art pieces dedicated not to warriors but to the everyday citizens who vanished along with P215. Their quiet heroism was contrasted in displays against Kite's ruthlessness, showcasing the razor-thin line between savior and destroyer as a haunting parable on their history. Earth never became pacifist, and they certainly held no delusions about a kinder galaxy. But the ghost of Elias Kite walked their corridors, and the question his life, death, and legacy embodied echoed with every new military expansion, every whispered alliance against some distant unknown. Are we becoming what we fought to survive? Earth's rise did not bring peace to the galaxy. Conflicts simmered and alliances remained volatile. The cosmic landscape was too chaotic for anything resembling perfect unity. Still, the legacy of the psychic devourer was real. The very fact of its intrusion had broken centuries of complacent inertia. Joint research efforts began, knowledge sharing across species as never before, all under the banner of understanding not just external threats, but internal weaknesses. Perhaps with enough time and vigilance, this alliance would grow stronger, more unified, as they faced dangers greater than petty rivalries. Their common fear of what lay in the unexplored voids forced a unity no mere trade pact could have forged. Elias Kite was not a saint, nor the perfect villain some wished to mold him into. He was a broken man who made choices he never wished to, in a war nobody desired. Yet, even from the soil of his sacrifice a different strength bloomed. It wouldn't bring love nor peace, but it brought understanding, and with that, there was hope. Not just for humanity, but for all civilizations reaching for the stars, praying they wouldn't meet only nightmares in the abyss. That was the true weight of Kite's legacy, not won with weapons, but in the echoes of a warning shouted in his fading years. Sometimes survival demanded terrible acts, but to choose that darkness blindly was to lose a different kind of war. A war for self-respect, for a future worth dying for. Earth had not yet won that war, not completely. But they were fighting it, each generation inheriting both the chilling strength of Elias Kite and the haunted legacy he fought so desperately to prevent. Now that war was in their hands, an eternal struggle they couldn't afford to lose. Time lost its rhythm, no longer measured by sunrises or election cycles. It was found in the quiet hum of reactors, the steady blinks of star maps updating on unexplored quadrants, and in the unspoken vigilance etched into the faces of humanity's descendants. Earth had changed from that brash upstart kite reluctantly ushered into the cosmic arena. They were no longer just powerful, but present. In their actions, even the most ordinary, there was a watchful stillness, like a predator finally aware of its true place in the shadows. This was not mere paranoia or an excuse for unchecked militarism. The horrors Kite unleashed to buy survival remained ever present. Memorials were built, not in grand plazas, but in the hearts of their most advanced space monitoring posts. Names scrolled along data plaques, names forgotten by history, but remembered by those who understood. Civilian colonists lost with entire worlds. Soldiers vaporized in Kite's grand gambits. Even children whose bright potential blinked out as echoes of war decisions rippled through generations. These were not distant martyrs, but a quiet reminder woven into the fabric of what Earth had become. Their power evolved. Gone were the desperate tactics of a species cornered. Instead, they had the luxury of long-term strategy, playing not for decades but centuries. This meant that when alarms did trigger from the deep voids, when a distress call pulsed on unknown wavelengths, Earth always moved first. These incidents often weren't invasions, but echoes of ancient mistakes, species on the cusp of their own interstellar age testing nuclear exchange before grasping its cosmic horrors. Immature civilizations who tapped into energies with an echo of the psychic devourer, their arrogance drawing unknowable threats toward them. Most often, Earth observed from the shadows. Their interference would rob others of the hard-fought growth they once earned in blood, but with observation came influence. Humanity wasn't loved, but the galaxy gained a sense of morbid respect. If Earth moved with startling speed to a particular sector, then something truly nightmarish was brewing. Their arrival could mean a quiet negotiation, a whispered warning, or rarely the deployment of carefully contained ancient horrors just enough to remind others of the price paid for a galaxy filled with too many potential kites. Earth no longer sat at alliance councils, their expertise too toxic, too tied to an ugly past. Yet, a new tradition formed. Every 100 standard rotations or whatever passed for that species' measure of time, each leader who sat on the governing body of the largest alliance was expected to take a pilgrimage of sorts. Not to any place of celebration, but to a small backwater world. That journey usually began not with speeches and fanfare, but in a simple garden, the final resting place of Elias Kite. On their knees before a simple headstone that simply read Earth, Survivor. They swore a quiet oath, a promise they might never repeat the mistakes that turned Kite from a simple soldier into a monster history couldn't quite erase. It wasn't peace, it wasn't redemption. But in the cold silence of uncharted galactic territories, Earth took on an unlikely yet crucial role. They were not merely defenders, but a grim reflection of what every star-bound species might become if desperation twisted their hearts. In that sense, Elias Kite, long in his silent grave, still held a kind of command not over ships or armies, but over the deepest fear they carried themselves. And so, with an ever-present vigilance forged in the crucible of their near extinction, Earth watched. And the galaxy slept just a little safer because of it. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.